Hello and welcome to Dialogue. Middle East tensions have been on the rise in the past week following the assassinations of senior Hamas and Hezbollah figures and vows of revenge by Iran and Hezbollah. Numerous countries, including the US, the UK, France, and many others, have urged their citizens to leave Lebanon as soon as possible in fear of a possible escalation of violence. What is the latest in the region? Is a violent response by Iran now a certainty? And how should the world community react and help bring the region back from the boiling point? Join us for our discussion today, live from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today are Kawa Hassan, non-resident fellow from the MENA program of the Stimson Center, and Dr. Sara Yael Hirschhorn, visiting professor at the University of Haifa, and Dr. Rob Geist Pinfold, a lecturer in peace and security at Durham University. Welcome to the show. So, Sara, I will start with you. The world is anticipating nervously of what's going to come in the region. I believe, sure, that citizens in Israel will also, probably are gripped with apprehension of what's going to happen, given the, what has been said, possible revenges, retaliation from Iran and Hezbollah. And also, governments are sending out alerts and warnings against the citizens flying to this region. I mean, how serious or even dangerous is the situation here?
I think everyone is prepared for a worst case scenario. I know sitting here in Jerusalem that I have prepared my own apartment with water and food for 3 days, and the expectation that perhaps there may be no electricity or other utilities. We are all waiting nervously for what the news of an attack will be. I think there's a feeling amongst Israelis that the waiting period itself is a kind of psychological warfare, as we don't know if and when this attack may arise. And it's been more than a week since the assassination of Sara Yael Hirschhorn in Tehran, and we've seen no strike retaliation since. So we are all waiting very anxiously to see how this will unfold. The news that we are hearing from the rumor mill is that it may be a two-pronged attack. The first, a strike by Hezbollah, an Iranian-backed proxy in Lebanon, and followed secondly by an attack from Iran itself. But really no one knows, and we also are unaware of when this may come about. So Israelis are trying to go about their daily lives. You may have seen photos and videos of people in Tel Aviv at the beach or in coffee houses trying to enjoy their day, but of course we are all on high alert. And as a U.S. citizen myself, I can tell you that I have received warnings from the Jerusalem consulate about the possibility of missile or rocket fire. So certainly we have been warned.
Mm-hmm. So Kawa, if you look at the Iranian, response, I mean, the assassination of course, Haniyeh, people would say is a humiliating blow to the security and intelligence of the Iranians. They have vowed to respond strongly, but at the same time, people are saying there could be a possibility that probably will be a show of force instead of a real attack against the Israelis, given there's a lack of real, let's say, willingness to start a war with Israel.
Well, I mean, so far, based on the information we have, and also the strategic calculation of the Iranian regime, I think so far it's clear that Iran doesn't want an all-out regional war with Israel. Because it's not in the strategic interest of Iran to have that war. Having said that, and as you rightly said, the assassination of Haniyeh in the heart of Tehran on the day of the inauguration of the new president, and with the presence of tens, if not hundreds, of international dignitaries, that was a big blow to the government, to the Iranian government. So they have no option but to retaliate. Having said that, again, the type of retaliation, I think it looks like they are still calibrating, because any miscalculation, and there are always in these kind of wars, there are always rooms for miscalculations, big miscalculations. For instance, if large number of civilians got killed or sensitive places in Israel are hit. I mean, these are all, and also, potential intervention by U.S. against Iran. These are all strategic calculations, risk assessment that has been, studied by the Iranians, and so it's really difficult to say right now what would be the kind of the attack the Iranians will initiate, when and for how long. So that's difficult, but for sure they will retaliate. And if it's, some people say, some analysts say, it will be a repetition of the April 13th attack. Again, difficult to say, because that was, if you repeat that without having any impact on Israelis from a strategic point of view, that will diminish your deterrence capacity. Iranians will do whatever they can from their, strategic calculations to somehow restore deterrence, and that is, I think, that's the dilemma, that's the conundrum for the Iranians.
Rob, during the campaign for the presidential election, now the new president of Iran, he talked about basically, let's say, improving relationship with the U.S. so as to lift or alleviate some of the sanctions on the country. Do you think that will become a factor in terms of whether or how they will revenge against the Israelis?
No, I think it will be less of a factor than you might think, because yes, we have a new Iranian president. Yes, he is from the reformist camp, but at the end of the day, it's Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, who really holds the power, particularly when it comes to Iranian foreign policy. And what we're hearing is that the Supreme Leader has authorized a retaliation against Israel, and that is expected, and that is going to be forthcoming. So I think that's Iran's primary strategic calculus at the moment, particularly, if you look at factors like the upcoming US presidential election. That's, a whole new wild card there. In November, you could have a situation where, yes, the US and Iran managed to have a detente, but then that can be all undone if Trump, for example, wins the election. So I don't think the Iranians right now will in the future, in the immediate future, be focused on an opening to the US. And indeed, the new Iranian president said he was very much anticipating friendly relations with all states apart from Israel. So there is a clear continuity element to Iranian foreign policy here, though, as has been said by some other analysts on this program, I think we'll also see an escalation, because Iran will feel a need to hurt Israel in order to restore its deterrence. It can't have just another repeat of those of that drone and missile attack in April that didn't really do any considerable damage to Israel, and we all reverted to the status quo that took place before that attack. I think it's more likely to see something like Sarah mentioned, a coordinated attack on multiple fronts from both Hezbollah and Iran, and this might actually go on over the course of a few days in a kind of war of attrition style scenario rather than just a one-off attack.
But Rob, of course, when it comes to Hezbollah, basically, its leader said that, regardless of the consequences, they will launch retaliation. So that's probably more sure a thing in terms of, launching attacks. But a coordinated attack, do you think there are some, why it takes more than a week now to launch the retaliation, to launch the attack? Are they coordinating with each other now?
Oh, they'll definitely be coordinating with each other. But as Sarah said as well, there's this degree of psychological warfare. The longer Iran keeps this sword of Damocles hovering over Israel's head, the more it can generate panic in Israel's society, the more it can do damage to Israel's economy, for example. And we saw that last time. I was speaking to many friends and colleagues in Israel who were saying they stayed up all night in fear of the Iranian attack. And in the end, it kind of proved to be very much a paper tiger. Nothing really happened. So there is also that fear from the Iranians that they might actually end up with an attack that doesn't do that much kinetic damage. So they'll be looking to inflict a psychological price on Israel as well. And Hezbollah and Iran will be coordinating very, very closely. We often hear Hezbollah described as an Iranian proxy. I think that diminishes their agency in this relationship. Hezbollah also have their own role and their own agenda, but they are, of course, very, very closely linked to the Iranian government and regime, and they will coordinate any response with Iran.
Sarah, about assassination of Haniyeh, Israeli side has neither confirmed nor denied its responsibility, its involvement. But let's assume it's Israel that committed such the killing there. Of course, it's for, let's say, revenge, for October 7th attack on Israel by the Hamas. But then we're talking about, like another side, possible retaliation against Israel. What is the purpose of killing, say, Haniyeh inside Iran, at the occasion of the inaugural occasion of the new president?
Well, first, it's unclear that the timing of the assassination was to coordinate with the new incumbent presidency. It seems that the bomb or the exploding device had been planted weeks or even months before, and it was only because of the visit by Ismail Haniyeh on this occasion that they saw an opportunity. But I think that the implications for this were twofold. First, to strike in the heart of Tehran and at the heart of the Iranian regime on this very important day, to show the weakness of the intelligence and military apparatus in being able to deter this attack. The fact that Israel was able to get so close to Ismail Haniyeh, that perhaps this bomb had been planted in coordination with very senior members of circles around the core of the Iranian political structure, obviously is meant to send a signal that Israel can reach you anywhere, and it can reach you really in the heart of your own territory. And that alone, I think, is sufficient to be a very significant warning. The second element of this puzzle, I think, is related to the governance of Hamas and the ceasefire talks that are ongoing, especially regarding Israeli hostages. Some say that the killing of Ismail Haniyeh has put the possibility of freeing the hostages even farther away. But others argue that now, with the elevation of Yahya Sinwar to the head of the Hamas Politburo, as well as their military division, this actually will provide for more flexibility. Given that Sinwar himself is in Gaza, or we believe him to still be in Gaza, that he's probably hiding in a tunnel. He is himself experiencing the very devastating effects of the last 9 months, and perhaps because of his own situation and his closeness to what other Palestinians are suffering, unlike Ismail Haniyeh, who had been, in Qatar or in Iran, and as has been rumored, had been enjoying a lavish lifestyle in the Four Seasons Hotel, seemed very remote from the realities of everyday Palestinians. And it is thought that this may be to gain leverage over the ceasefire agreement as well.
So, Sarah, are you saying that the Israeli government and Prime Minister Netanyahu is seriously looking at the ceasefire, obviously now sponsored by the U.S. with Hamas, especially with the Sinwar?
It's very difficult to say. Obviously, there's a lot of rumors within Israel, even coming from senior members in the military and political core, that Netanyahu himself has been an instructionary figure to the conclusion of a ceasefire deal. And hostage families are extremely upset with Netanyahu and his coalition in not reaching an agreement. But pressure from the United States, as well as the military obligations that may require shifting massive amounts of resources to the north, have obviously had an impact on military and strategic calculations about how much longer Israel can really remain in Gaza, and the lives of the hostages who, every day they spend there their opportunities for survival are diminishing, has obviously had a deep impact. And I hope that we are getting closer to a ceasefire deal.
Well, we're looking at the role to be played by big powers like the U.S., like Russia, like China, possible here. Kawa, we know that there's reports Russia basically asking Iranians, not to target civilians inside Israel so as to avoid a regional war. What is the consideration?
So what is the?
The Russians are advising the Iranians, not to target in their retaliation the civilians inside Israel, so as to avoid a possible regional war there. So, what is the Russian consideration here?
Well, I think Russia, like China, like US, regional countries, they're all worried about the eruption of the an all-out regional war. I mean, that's in no one's interest, obviously. Probably in the interest of some hardliners in Israel, maybe including Prime Minister Netanyahu. But really, U.S. doesn't want a regional war. Russia doesn't want it. China doesn't want it. Arab countries don't want it. Nobody wants a regional war. So an all-out regional war is not something that should be taken lightly. I mean, so imagine that you've got a continuous regional war where Iran, Hamas, and other partners / proxies of Iran attack Israel on a daily basis for quite some time, and Israel retaliate. Imagine the impact on the regional economy, on the international economy, on the politics. So too much is really at stake when it comes to international politics, when it comes to global economy, and that's the reason that Russia, reportedly Russia is trying to encourage Iranians to make sure that civilians will not be killed. But having said that, there are no guarantees that civilians will not be hurt or killed. So again, the rooms for miscalculation is really there. And with every escalation, the odds for miscalculation increases.
Mm-hmm. Well, Rob, speak of the role, of course, the U.S. is playing, let's say, a prominent role in terms of sponsoring the ceasefire, in terms of influencing Israel, probably the only country that had the ability to influence the decision-making inside Israel. But still, people would ask, Rob, was the U.S. aware of the assassination of Haniyeh inside Iran? Or, do you think the U.S. agree with the Israeli decision to kill such a figure, that will result something basically worse, right?
It's impossible to know for sure, but the leaks we're hearing from the Biden administration is that no, they did not approve of this action in advance, and indeed they were quite annoyed by this assassination. The US has no love for Haniyeh. This is not someone whom they've got very close ties or contacts with. But there is this fear that it will basically scupper, as Sarah mentioned, the hostage negotiations that have been ongoing for a long time. There's going to divide inside Israel, but also between Israel and the US, whether Israel should prioritize defeating and destroying Hamas and taking the fight to Hezbollah on the one hand, or on the other hand, getting the hostages back, which would necessitate a ceasefire or a significant de-escalation of hostilities. The US has been very much backing that latter strategy. Israel's government, headed by Netanyahu and various far-right allies, I think you can argue they're much more in the former camp. So this really annoyed the US because it felt like, Israel has literally blown up the hostage negotiations. And you heard leaks from US administration officials saying we're actually very, very, very close to a deal. And now, all bets are off and we're back to square one again. And then there's the issue of political dynamics within Hamas. You hear a lot of people criticizing media outlets for saying that Haniyeh was a moderate or a pragmatist. This was not someone who loves Israel and is ready to accept a two-state solution, but at the same time, he has actually shown a degree of pragmatism towards negotiations and discussions for things like a permanent ceasefire that other Hamas leaders have not shown before. And again, leaks are saying that he was actually relatively in favor of a ceasefire deal, whereas actually Sinwar was more hardline. And that's the reversal of previous dynamics, where the Gaza-based leadership in Hamas tended to be more pragmatic and the political leadership outside of Palestine tended to be more hardline. With Sinwar's basically taking power in Hamas and now consolidating control, the dynamics have very much shifted to the Gaza faction, which now appears more radical than those groups in exile. So again, this is something that will complicate hostage talks and possibly put a ceasefire deal further away from where we were previously.
Mm-hmm. Well, Rob, you said that Washington obviously is not happy with some of the practices or policies by Prime Minister Netanyahu. But how much influence? Everybody would assume Washington has probably the strongest influence on Israel. Do you think they can draw red lines, or are there red lines? Basically, to Prime Minister Netanyahu, this is what you can do or what you cannot do.
Look, I think there is this myth that a lot of people think that Washington will say jump and the Israelis will say how high. And, just like it's it's an oversimplification to call Hezbollah a proxy of Iran. It's also an oversimplification to think that the Israelis will do whatever the Americans ask or tell of them. Yes, the US is arguably the only foreign power with any real ability to influence decision-making within Israel. But at the same time, I actually think Benjamin Netanyahu is far more attentive to internal Israeli dynamics. And he's been like this throughout his political career. He's always sought to kind of buy off or buy time with the international community and the Americans in particular, whilst at the same time looking inwards. Netanyahu's eye is always on his coalition's survival and the next Israeli election and public opinion polls. He is currently dependent on far-right partners for his survival. He's Israel's longest-serving prime minister. He's been in power for so long. He's burned his bridges with so many more potential more moderate coalition partners. He is now dependent on extremists like Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich for his survival. And those figures are very much in the camp of wanting Israel to continue this war, to even reoccupy Gaza, and to escalate tensions with Hezbollah in the north, not to start another war. That's not the end there, but the end would be to force Hezbollah back from Israel's border, ideally to the Litani River, so in kind of, the South Midlands of Lebanon rather than right on the Lebanese border. So Netanyahu is looking more inwards than outwards, and I think that's the key factor that influences his strategic decision-making and military considerations.
Well, Sara, inwards rather than outwards. Netanyahu just got back from Washington. He gave a speech to the Congress. Did he get more support from Washington, or more maneuver room in terms of dealing with Hamas there?
Well, I think he's looking both inwards and outwards, but when he's looking outwards, I believe that he's looking towards what he expects to be a subsequent Trump presidency, which may be more in favor of some of Israel's strategic goals. And what Netanyahu highlighted in his speech to Congress and some of his other behind-the-scenes diplomacy was the shared threat of the United States and Iran. And certainly the Biden administration is just not receptive to any kind of further escalation with Iran, especially before the elections in November. And you can see that Harris and Waltz are now under a significant amount of pressure from electorates in swing states that are very concerned about wrapping up the Gaza war, and perhaps imposing arms embargoes upon Israel, that they don't want to see Israel bringing the fight to other Iranian-backed proxies. And Netanyahu obviously, and I think any other leader in Israel, not just Netanyahu himself, but I think there's a consensus amongst the Israeli military brass and political class that the larger threat to Israel is Iran. It is not Hamas. It is all of Iran and her allies, and they see a need to escalate, whereas the United States does not. And they're really at a strategic impasse here. And Netanyahu has tried to force this issue, but I think it's very difficult with the Biden administration. And while he was there in Washington, I think he was trying to also gauge what the potential could be under a second Trump presidency.
But Sara, there's a thinking that the U.S. would rather stay away from the troubles in the region, or at least not to fight a war with Iran. But for the Netanyahu government, they would have a deeper involvement of the U.S. So is that the case here?
Well, I think, Israel's in a tough position because they can't bring any kind of escalation to Iran without United States support, whether in its tacit agreement to its political objectives. For example, as we just heard about the fact that they don't seem to have notified the United States in advance about their plans to assassinate Hania. And now certainly some very strong language and even actions from the United States, the UK, and other Western governments that are considering arms embargoes or halting arms sales to Israel. And Israel certainly cannot prosecute these military actions without these armaments. So they have to thread the needle between trying to convince Western powers that this is a fight in their interest and it's a shared battle without bringing a regional or even world war upon not only Israel, but all of the West. So it's a very disconcerting moment. And we hope that many powers, China, Russia also, who are urging for restraint, see the reason to try to avoid further escalation on all counts.
Well, Kawa, you see, all the big powers, the U.S., Russia, and China, they are basically urging restraint on the side of Iran, on the side of Hezbollah, at least now. This is a common ground, right, among the big powers. Is there anything they can do, basically, to work together to help prevent a full-blown regional conflict?
Well, I mean, theoretically, you would think, yes, they should work together because the situation is very dangerous, particularly after the events of the last week and the anticipated Hezbollah and Iranian attacks and the anticipated Israeli counterattack. So the escalation ladder is really, it's just the escalation is getting to probably, we are getting one step or 1 inch closer to an all-out regional war. So you would think, yes, they should work together. But in reality, I mean, that's not the case for reasons we all know. And that's got to do with different, conflicts over bilateral relations, conflicts over global geopolitics, over, for instance, the war on Ukraine, which impedes any cooperation between US and Russia when it comes to try to together join forces and together trying to de-escalate. The same, I think, applies to China and the US for reasons we all know. It's got to do with the multiple issues of conflicts between both countries. So unfortunately, right now, despite the fact that indeed we are hearing calls from different capitals, be it Beijing, be it Washington, London, Berlin, Moscow, other capitals, influential capitals, calls for de-escalation. But at this stage, they remain only calls. And unfortunately, unless things will completely get out of control, and these major powers would see the need to at least try, work together, try to de-escalate and bring, the parties, make sure that there won't be a devastating war. Until then, I don't see any window of opportunity, any chance for any common actions together, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Well, Sara, there's a report, latest being that the Iranian side have said they are also concerned, or their top priority is both the ceasefire and retaliation. If there's any progress, solid progress, for example, for the phase 1 in terms of ceasefire sponsored by the U.S., between Hamas, between the Israelis, ceasefire, hostages release. Can we say there's a possibility that that might be avoided, a regional conflict?
I hope so. Certainly progress on the ceasefire deal might be an option. I also think that Iran may do the calculation that it is better for it to respond via its proxies in Lebanon with a more local retaliation on the northern border, as opposed to some kind of all-out strike against all of territorial Israel during something like we saw in April. I think Iran and Lebanon are both aware that the response would be harsh, and their people are not interested in a devastating war themselves. And I hope that everyone will come to their senses, but it's unclear what other kind of development can bring us back from the brink, because there are high tensions and high emotions and certainly feelings of revenge that are circulating, and it is sometimes difficult to think with more rational calculations in these kinds of moments.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.